Hey everyone, it's Chad,
Hey, it's Khalil.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. Alright, to start out this episode, we'd like to just, of course, just recap what we talked about last. In our last episode, we finished out by discussing the idea in which how in liberal democracies, the people have the ability to protest their government and, are not immediately subjugated to persecution or just killings and mass imprisonments, anything like that. We compared um, some of the most violent crackdowns in U.S. history, including the Kent State shootings, to the very obvious, very brutal crackdown in China, being the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. And we discussed how the differences in intentions and the differences in execution in both of these instances really show the difference between the a liberal system's motives for crushing dissent and a authoritarian's motives for crushing the dissent. In essence, it was that in a liberalist system, we still have the right to protest. We still have the right to voice our opinions against the government. When these things happen, it's not because the government is wanting to exterminate all opposition to it. Lots of times it ends up being very localized, and then sometimes, guardsmen say it's self-defense. Even then, it's a stretch. But for authoritarian regimes, the motive is to crush all dissent and to stop others from rising up and going against the government later on. And so in this episode, we're going to continue on our points on some of the benefits that we see in the liberal system. And to start out with this one, we're going to be talking about religion. So in a liberal system, liberal democracies are marked by the idea of religious toleration. I mean, that is the ability for people to practice whichever religion they subscribe to without persecution. Um, One of the hallmarks of liberal democracies is that they don't establish a state religion. In days past, in kings, in other countries, they would have an established religion that everyone was kind of believed to have followed, or the government would be proudly espousing it. However, in liberal democracies, that is not the case. Before we get to that, we'd like to, of course, just touch on the idea again of religious toleration. For the United States, this is enshrined in our First Amendment, which says, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, end quote. And again, what you get with that is the idea that the state cannot, one, create a religion or immediately subscribe to a religion that all of its citizens must follow, or that the public government will advertise. It gets a little messy with the United States because in reality we do have some ties to Christianity and how justices, public officials have to take an oath with a Bible, and on our money we have like in God we trust. And so it gets a little muddy in some aspects. However, we do not have a state established, a state sanctioned religion. What we really have is the ability for anyone to practice whatever religion they see fit, whichever one they want to do. And for Khalil, I'll let you start, but I did have another quote which kind of just um, re-emphasizes this point and how it's very prevalent among liberal democracies. Article 9 of the European Union's Human Rights Convention states that, quote, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. End quote.
Yeah, with that quote from the EU, what is it, the Human Rights Commission?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's very similar to the to many of the conditions of the First Amendment in the United States Constitution, in the sense that amongst all liberal democracies, whether they be from Europe, whether they be from America, and this is copied, amongst other liberal democracies as they developed around the world, in the past 100 years or so, um, that they a hallmark amongst liberal democracies is that they accept certain things like a religious toleration because at least in Europe, because I'd like to center a little bit on Europe on this one because of its history with religion, that it would go ahead, in its Human Rights Commission to prioritize religious toleration in the same way. Because anybody that knows anything about the 30 Years' War knows that Europe is a place in the world where it's like where religion has played a big role in politics. Anybody that's ever heard about the nearly 1,000 year long dark ages, and it was dark because for the most part, a lot of scientific achievements and things that would overall increase quality of life, like education, societal development and legal systems, they were all based off of an interpretation of the Christian Bible, and the rulings of the Catholic Church in Rome. So Europe is a place in the world where, if you know anything about its history, it doesn't surprise you that after that long of time, well, actually, no. I think the point is that it would surprise you after its long history of religious intolerance. During the Crusades, and during the religiously motivated Reconquista, which in some ways is just Spaniards defending their land from invaders, but it also had a religious context. And the fact that it was 700 years plus, adds to that religious factor. And the supreme reign of the Catholic Church lasting until the 30 Years' War, which killed millions and millions of people, in a time in European history where the populations of countries, in regions within Central Europe where most of the fighting took place was only a fraction of what it is today. Um, so yeah, exactly. Like it is quite a significant achievement that the EU Human Rights Convention, I mean, Commission, would go ahead and prioritize the right to freedom of thought, including religion, because um, that has been a big part of its history, and also, yeah, also in trying to fight back the Ottoman Empire from expanding into Europe, and spreading Islam into Eastern Europe. So, yeah, like Europe has a long history of religious intolerance, so this was a pretty big step. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And so as we said, this is one of the hallmarks of liberal systems is this religious toleration. As I described, the First Amendment says that the First Amendment of the United States says that the Congress cannot make a law respecting an establishment of religion, end quote. So once again, that means that the state, that our country cannot create or cannot explicitly follow one single religion and enforce that upon its citizens. In Europe, in the old times, as Khalil kind of described earlier, the Catholic state was a governing body that many different countries and peoples would follow. That is not the case now in the liberal systems that we have. We have popular religions. I mean, the United States, I believe, still is a majority Christian state, and that is like evident on just how some of our politicians are. But however, it is not the state religion of the United States, being Christianity. That's not the case. In liberal systems, it is not forced upon the people to follow any sort of religion. You could be atheist and you will not be thrown in jail because of your lack of spiritualism. You could follow or not follow whatever religion you want, and ideally not be persecuted for that. In contrast, um, uh, other philosophers, such as Lenin and Marx, viewed religion as what in some of Marx's writing would be called the quote opium of the people, end quote. And so what you would get is a forced atheism enforced by the state, in which the people cannot explicitly follow any sort of religion, and the state itself does not neither endorses any religion nor allows it to be kind of practiced within those kind of sorts of government. So once again, in contrast, you get this opposition to religion altogether, as opposed to allowing whatever people to follow whatever religion they see fit.
This may also become a future special episode or even small series. But as Chad and I were just thinking about the idea of this series before we started recording, we were thinking a bit about the role that religion plays in a stable society. Of course, state religions, they are dangerous in the sense um, um, that they are they are a lot that they are very absolutist, in their persecution of other religions. That their religion is the number one highest of um, importance, and the highest authority, within their state. And so any of those that don't agree, don't follow that state religion within the state must be persecuted. And then they should expand to other areas that don't share that religion, um, as some sort of crusade to bring those people in line. There are very modern examples of this, like the Central Powers of Austria, Hungary, and Germany. They were able to kind of twist the internal politics of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, before World War One, in such a way that when World War One broke out, um, they were able to get the Ottoman Empire to declare jihad, holy war against the Christian, and it's confusing because Austria-Hungary and Germany were both Christian empires, but they were going to declare holy war jihad against the Christian powers of France, Britain, and Russia. And so there are very modern examples of this, as well as, even very fundamentalist Islamic groups in the Middle East right now, like ISIS, Al Qaeda, and the Taliban taking over Afghanistan again, but then also very Christian nationalist nations like Hungary, increasingly, Poland, um, um, many other nations, within Europe, increasingly, um, and some would argue to a certain extent America. But when you have a system like liberal democracies do, in where there is not a state religion, there's a certain agreement that religion is not going to have an impact on how one governs, or at least that's not the state policy, then it prevents a lot of potential conflict. It's just that Chad and I were thinking, like, when you try to take away religion in its entirety from a civilization forcibly, then it kind of takes away a lot of morals as well. Like, the moral degradation of the society can leak out into open violence, you know, um, if religion is taken out of the equation. Because religion, although many atheists today try to see it as a very destructive and very dangerous force that needs to be taken out of society, it often it often has an interesting effect amongst most people that aren't incredibly violent, and not incredibly naturally violent, you know, um, to be to be something that reserves one from conflict, that they won't go and kill their neighbor, they'll actually love their neighbor because that's what their religion teaches them to do. If there's not any religion that teaches people to do that, then you can expect a moral degradation of society to leak out.
Yeah. A lot of our morals that we have as people are grounded or at least came from religion. The whole idea of treat others how you'd like to be treated, again, is from religion. It is mentioned in the Christian Bible. And so you would ask yourselves what would happen if this was to be removed generations and generations later. How would those people be acting if they were not to have that moral base? And some would argue that is kind of what we see today in modern societies. A lot of conservative people would argue that this is what is happening in the United States and why politics and life in general has become so divisive and violent and confusing is because of this lack of religion in that is being a lack of religion that is being taught to people, say in schools or at least by their families or other people around them. And so it's definitely an interesting question, and I believe it's one that we're going to address later on in a kind of special episode or a special series. Um, but yeah, this could be one of the consequences that you see if religion is to be removed from a society is the degradation or at least the downward slide of like the trends of how morals would be traditionally viewed in a country. Um, Another consequence of removing religion from a society is that the government, usually a totalitarian government, can elevate themselves to be the only godlike power for the people. Um, you could use that as an example, or you could just kind of see it this way, in that the government is basically your God. They protect you, they give back to you, goods, services, they watch over you, you can have faith in them, you could participate in their good works. And so basically that government can be your God. And for a totalitarian system or a totalitarian leader, who seeks power, who seeks all approval from their citizens, this is a perfect way to get that, is to make your government basically be the only God in the sky for the people in, whatever state that is.
Yeah, and that's kind of why Americans are so skeptical of giving the government like so much authority, so much power, and it almost kind of legitimizes the original Republican idea of small government. You know that our founders originally started off as they wanted a small government that doesn't intrude. You know, now this is a very broad, bipartisan way of viewing government. It's not just the Republicans, you know. But it kind of explains why Americans are so skeptical, because they know that even that if they succumb to the idea that their government can provide for them, they give them the power to not provide for them, and like like a robot that you build up, it could and then turn into your slave, you build up the government, after some revolution, against Britain, like with the Americans as they did, um, and you make the government do what you want to do. You give them the power and you build them the machinery, and the institutions, and the wiring, so that they can provide for you. You know, just like in Terminator, they could easily turn back against you and like persecute you or try to end you and kill you. Now, it's not exactly the same, of course, but it's an interesting analogy. That the government can go haywire if you give it too much control. And Chad and I, as also an additional idea we were thinking about is why America. And I talked about this in the past, one of our past episodes in this series, but why America never really fell to totalitarianism. Never really fell to fascism or excess ultra nationalism, in a time when other nations, in Europe, in the global north were really starting to fall into that. At least America, for all its flaws in the 30s and 40s and even the 20s, they like American, it it at least maintained institutional values of democracy, and never explicitly said that it was now a fascist state, or now that it was a dictatorial nationalist state. We did have a president that led over us for 12 years and got elected 4 times, you know, but we did not see him as a dictator. That's the interesting thing. So, exactly. When you get rid of religion in society, like in the USSR, um, the a dictator can easily take the power of a religion, like what Stalin did, and just like what Mao did during the Cultural Revolution, and as Xi Jinping is trying to do right now, trying to get rid of all different types of big Abrahamic religions, to be able to um, in other Eastern religions nearby, practiced by many people nearby, um, so that the government, the CCP, can fulfill that authority. You know, tear down the temple, tear down the synagogue, tear down the church, tear down the mosque, because those people are threats. Even though the Uyghurs of Xinjiang, majority of which are Muslim, make up only 8% of the population, and in a very big and barren place of China, or in a very big and expansive desert-like place in China, and where there's not too much quality of life amongst those people. You wouldn't, like, if you were the Chinese government with as much surveillance and the high military budget and the massive soldiers and party members. You I if I was the premier of China, I wouldn't see them as a threat, But if I was Xi Jinping, thinking the way he does, seeing religion as such a big threat to the state, then I would want to want to get them out of the equation because they're such a threat to the legitimacy of the state. And that really helps you come to the conclusion that that if you see the CCP and Xi Jinping as a danger to free society, to human dignity, then you actually secretly recognize the importance of religion in society. No matter how atheist you are, you cannot um, dislike the policies of the CCP with its surveillance and its intrusiveness into the lives of the people, and what they're doing right now in Xinjiang and like intervening in nearby nations like Taiwan and Hong Kong, and then say that atheism is a good thing. When especially once you link the development of the CCP as being an atheist state.
I think the point that you could make is that, at the very least, what you should be valuing is the toleration of religion. You don't have to believe in Christianity, in Islam, in Buddhism to say that having a government that respects other people who do is a good. I think that's something that you can agree on. That having, like, allowing people to practice whatever religion that they subscribe to, that's a valuable thing, because at the end of the day, that is a personal freedom. That is a freedom that in a liberal system, in a liberal system ideally, is one of the most valued things that you have, because it is your freedom of expression, your freedom of belief, and that's something that a government should not be able to clamp down at all. So, like I said, in my point of view, that even if you are an atheist, you could view atheism as good, but at the end of the day, you cannot be forcing that on other people. Just as, like, you would not want a Christian nation to be forcing Christianity upon you. That should not be the end goal. You should allow people to, in a liberal system, you should be allowing people to practice whatever religion they want, even if you don't just subscribe to it. And at the end of the day, as long as they or the government isn't forcing it upon you or forcing you to not practice it, I think that's something that a lot of people can really agree on. Um, one of the points that you touched on about the persecution of the Uyghurs and the persecution of religious freedoms, I think could kind of lead into one of the next points that we want to make is that these issues, when they happen in totalitarian societies, like the issues of persecution of religious clampdowns in those societies, they don't get a lot of attention. This leads into our point about in liberal societies, when injustices happen, when things that go against personal freedoms, go against civil rights, or just controversies in general, when these things happen, they get noticed. People know when um, when there is an instance of police brutality in the United States, because you'll have hundreds of or thousands of news reporters, sites, newspapers, TV channels, journalists, vlogs, podcasts, YouTube channels. Everyone will be reporting on that because we have the freedom to do so. When these injustices happen, the world knows, the world responds. Um, One of those biggest ones of recently was the incident of the killing of George Floyd. When this happened in May of 2020, protests not only what became one of the biggest protest movements in the United States didn't just happen in the United States. It happened in Britain. It happened in, I think, even like Sweden or Finland or something like that. European liberal democracies participated and noticed when these injustices happened because in our system we have the freedom to report on these instances. We have the freedom to spread the truth. Whereas in totalitarian systems, they use their power once again to clamp down on these freedoms that we have, just as they would be clamping down on religions. They do so for controversies. They do for truths that may be inconvenient to whatever the ruling party or leader is. However, in a liberal system, that's not even the case.
Right. Because the interesting thing, that you kind of have to look at with a surveillance society like CCP China is that when a human rights violation by the state or by actors of the state is enacted, even by a lone individual, um, like um, like the incident with Peng Shuai, a Chinese tennis player. Like apparently, I believe she was actually raped, by a high up party official in the CCP. But interesting thing about it, or even let's say like a police guards, they beat a homeless guy because they don't want the outward view of China, by tourists or by news agencies to be seen as dirty or as urban, but they want it to seem like a utopia, instances like that. The government has to know about it, and they have to know where the information is going to come out. Um, they have to um, and then they have to use the entire state apparatus to, let's say, slow down your Wi-Fi or to disable your social media account, disable every single person's social media account that was nearby the event that took place, and to silence them, send emails over to them, physically approach them to scare them, and this is easier with the cameras that are in the big cities, but the government has to act fast in the news that's coming out that might be dangerous to the party, which in today's modern age, in the 21st century, with devices and so much of the Chinese public today, much more so than 20 years ago, has like a certain amount of wealth that they can afford, an iPhone to record an instance of something. But the government has to act so much faster now because of this, that they can stop bad news from getting out. That's why we rarely hear anything about China, about anything that's going on the inside. A revolution may happen tomorrow, but we wouldn't know. We have no clue. We hear about like the inability um, for Chinese citizens to be able to take out certain amount of loans, but And I hear, here and there, from like little China watchers on YouTube or Twitter, or Google, different news sites that may be the end of China. How am I going to know? Because I'm looking on the outside. But this is all because the government is moving so fast that it stops these things from being seen, which is shocking. In America, they don't really do that much of a job to try to stop you from seeing something. There's a reason why the original footage of George Floyd, for those whole 9 minutes, 8, 9 minutes, being leaned, neck on the ground, full weight of a man, on the street, was recorded for those full 9 minutes by bystanders, and people all across America and really all across the world were able to know what happened within minutes of the event. The government didn't try to stop it from being seen like how it would in CCP China. You know, um, like when outrage takes place in America, people know about it. People may even like burn flags, but America, it's strong enough that it can take that kind of protest, and because in America you're able to make change, whenever a protest happens, the government doesn't need to call in troops as if it was a foreign invasion that's about to take over the country, because in China you're given two choices: submit or revolt. In America, you're able to make a choice. You're able to change things. You're able to reform. And so that was the interesting thing about George Floyd, is that people all around the world knew America's flaws, and had a really great example of it. But America wasn't so insecure that it thought that it had to shut it up, even under the Trump administration.
Yep. At the end of the day, just as it is for religion, in a liberal system, the freedom of information is tolerated. And this could go once again for good information and for bad information. When we have our flaws, everyone knows it. The entire world knows it. So that's why when Chinese public officials will, go on Twitter and mock the United States for racism or things like that, at least you guys know about it. At least we tell you about it. In China, we could have no idea that they just committed an entire city could have just burnt down and we never know. But in a liberal system, just as it is for religion, information is tolerated, both good or bad. And so with that, that's about as much as we're going to be talking about in this episode. In the next one, we'll be talking about more about the truth, how it is once again tolerated and encouraged in a liberal system, and then go on to the reasons about why liberal systems are so supported and so strong because the people have the will to support it. So yeah, with that, we're the Marshals of Truth, and we'll see you in the next episode.